Hello, greetings. Hello, everyone. Welcome. This is this special edition again this week's of my weekly show that happens every Wednesday at noon. And if you joined us last week, you know I mentioned that we have a Seeking Common Ground series happening for the entire month of October. So we are excited to welcome you all here with us today. Take a moment, hit the thumbs up button for us. Also, please share this in your networks. Share this on your personal social pages, because we really want to have an interactive conversation. And we also welcome questions from the audience. Towards the end of our program today, we will try to pull a select few questions and bring them up on screen and have one of our panelists answer them for you. So again, welcome to our second series today in Seeking Common Ground, and we're talking all things data as it relates to education. And we have an amazing set of panelists for you today, a group of experts that you all are going to learn a lot from. So I am going to allow each and every one of them to represent themselves and tell you a little bit more about them. So I am going to start on the West Coast. Hey, Kareem, can you introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. Hey, everybody. I'm part of the Brightbeam family. My name is Kareem Weaver. I'm activist. Department of Juvenile Justice in Oakland Unified. And, I'm a Cali boy, a city boy. Went to school in the South at Morehouse and then in South Carolina after that. And I mainly focus on getting children access to the things they need in life in general, and then literacy specifically with the out here doing what I can to contribute to kids having a better opportunity and better future for life.
Thank you, Kareem. I think we had some technical difficulties, but we got the gist of what you were saying. Thank you so much for joining us, and we really appreciate you being here, and appreciate you getting up early. We know it's a little early for you out there in California.
Yeah, y'all killing me. Y'all killing me. It's early.
Well, we know you love the students. You love the students. So, Marika, can you introduce yourself to the audience? And thank you for being here.
Sure. I am happy to be here. I am in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, and I am the co-founder of the Twin Cities Innovation Alliance and the Midwest Center for School Transformation. I have been working on the ending the school to prison pipeline and the ever expanding cradle to prison algorithm that connects back to the data we're going to talk about today. And I am happy to be here with this panel.
Ooh, you're going to have to unpack that cradle to prison algorithm. Everybody's antennas went up with that one. So we're looking forward to getting into the conversation with you. Next, we have Paige. Welcome, Paige. Please introduce yourself to our audience.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Paige Kowalski. I'm Executive Vice President of the Data Quality Campaign. We're based in Washington, D.C., but Kareem, my heart is with you. I'm a native Californian, and whenever I hear let's start with the West Coast, I perk up a little bit thinking it might be me, but I am out here on the East Coast. DQC is a national policy and advocacy organization, and our mission really is to make sure that everyone has the information they need to make better decisions, whether you are like me and you have two high school boys who are, especially my senior, running around trying to look at schools and figure out FAFSA and what do all these rankings mean and where are we supposed to go to get a good job, all the way up to governors and state legislators who need good information about what's happening in our schools and communities so that they can be thoughtful about how to spend all these federal dollars that are coming their way. And our work is really about ensuring that our states have the policies in place that ensure that information is collected and secured and shared appropriately, and that it's used to make sure that all of our students and our own children have access and opportunity.
Thank you. And we have Natasha. Welcome, Natasha. Please introduce yourself to our audience today.
I am so happy to be here. My name is Natasha Dunn, and I am first and foremost a mother of 3 amazing children and young adults. They're really my reasons and why I got into this education activism, because as a parent, we navigate through the system and we're actually on the ground in the schools. And as a parent, I had an opportunity to really see the schools from a different perspective. My background was in education and in community organizing. So I had a higher level view of what was going on in the schools, but it was nothing compared to that hands-on on the ground experience by being a parent, specifically a Black parent, parenting twin Black boys in the system as well. And from that, I just really started getting involved in ensuring that other Black parents had a voice, had the information and the tools necessary to really take their children's education into their own hands. I started doing organizing with the Black Star Project here in Chicago with the great Philip Jackson, really helping him in getting the word out to Black parents about how to really bring home the issues that are specific to our community and getting parents to be leaders in that work. And from there, just started doing some other type of organizing. And I am now the co-founder of an organization called the Black Community Collaborative. And essentially what we do is we bring all of our Black key leaders to the table so that we can be the ones to craft out what's best for our community. We seek and fight for Black equity, essentially. We believe that we are the ones to really know what's best for our community, and we deserve to be at the table to shape that. And in terms of data, that is one of my joys. I love looking at it. I love analyzing it. And most importantly, I love making it palatable and understandable for my community. So essentially putting it in layman's terms so that our community can really see what's really happening from an analytical standpoint.
Woo! Powerful, powerful, powerful. As you all can see, we have very qualified experts here to have this conversation about all things data. So yes, welcome. Just again, housekeeping. If you are just joining us, please make sure that you hit the thumbs up button and share this. We really want to invite you all in to have a very interactive conversation with this group of panelists here. So I'm going to jump right into the questions, right? And this one is it kind of packages it all in one question. So I'm going to come around to each and every one of you to give an answer to this one. And so, how can schools address parent concerns about student privacy, appropriate use of data, and third-party data collection, or what's known as data mining? I'm going to come to you first, Marika. If you're talking, I think you're on mute.
I'll take that question. I think one of the biggest challenges that we have is a lack of education and awareness about the different ways that data is used and the consent that is given that leads to this this kind of nebulous place around student privacy and data. And so what I think we really need to be thinking about, and not just for our parents, but the staff and the people in the schools, is that we need to have a foundational data literacy so that everyone can actually participate in the conversation. We need to have a conversation about what are the policies that exist and what are the policies that need to be in place, because many of the policies we have were designed for a world that we no longer live in and has not kept pace with the digital progress. And so first, it's really about raising awareness, educating people about what actually is happening now, what agency do you have over the data? And then the conversation I think we also need to be having with parents is, what happens when something goes wrong with the data that they've used? How do you repair harm, and how do you repair trust with communities, and how do you think about going forward when none of these conversations have happened or are in place? And it's often a select few people that participate in these conversations, and we need to blow that up.
Woo, talk about the double-edged sword of data. That's a lot. So I'm going to come back to you, Kareem. Same question. Having heard what Marika just said, what are your thoughts on that same question?
I think when we're talking about getting parents up to speed on things, and I think the key is helping them understand what data should be doing, how it should be used, and letting them know what their rights are and the risks involved. So basically, it's giving people information and being honest with folks. Data is important in schools. It can drive instruction. It can help you flag challenges. It can help you learn what's working and what's not working. We don't have data. We just kind of spin ourselves in circles. We don't know what's working and what's not. But at the same time, there are risks, and Marika laid out some of those risks. You mentioned a few of them even before our show started. And that's real. Parents need to understand what their rights are. And it goes beyond the FERPA law. So there are some federal laws around privacy of student data, et cetera. So there's that. And as things evolve with technology, there are things that go beyond what those old school rules were designed to catch. So you got to tell your parents, hey, look, they're giving this test. You know what? We're not even sure about who's going to get access to this data. They don't have a good system around how to ensure that it's going to be private. Maybe a third party has access. Just tell them. We got to start trusting our parents. We got to start informing them and trusting them with information. And I'm not saying that you just dump a bunch of stuff on parents, but just say, hey, do you know what happens to these test results after your kid takes that assessment? Do you know what happens with your grades and your CUNE files and your records and all of this after? Do you know? So I think the first step is, even beyond how we prepare parents to navigate that, is we have to actually trust our parents and be honest with them and give them information, not just about the risks, but also some of the potential benefits or the intended benefits, so that if those benefits don't come about, well, then maybe you start looking at the risk reward ratio a little bit differently, but they got to be informed. So I say that's the first thing, is to give parents information about the intentionality of the design and also some of the risks.
I love that, Kareem. That's absolutely right. As someone who got into this education work also as a parent, organizer, and activist, that's exactly what parents need and deserve. Paige, I want to come to you as well from the perspective of the data quality campaign. What are your thoughts? This same question.
Yeah, I first want to say I cannot improve at all on what both Marika and Kareem said. Just 100%. I think they are spot on about trust and communication. And I heard data literacy, talking and being clear about exactly what the harm is. When we misuse data, I think a lot of these privacy conversations fall on this cybersecurity side and data leak side, but there is a bigger conversation to have about the risk of misuse of information, which is something Marika is our resident expert on here. I think the one of the biggest struggles that we have is we're asking our schools, in addition to everything else that they've been asked to do, to be technology, legal, and ethics experts. And as Kareem mentioned, this is evolving. Our technology and our data use and our ability to collect and share information has evolved so much faster than our policies and our laws like FERPA have been able to keep up with. And we're sort of putting that burden of that lack of policy evolution, we're putting that burden on our schools. And there is a conversation to be had about the role of schools, but the capacity to start addressing some of these training issues, the awareness raising, the training, the data literacy, how not to misuse it, needs to come from our states. And that's going to come down to funding and changing perhaps even teacher preparation credentialing requirements to account for this entire new realm of instruction and learning that uses apps. And I saw somebody in the chat say that their students are signing on and off apps all day long, particularly over the last year and a half. And we all, including myself as a parent, need to get smarter about what that means and how we can protect our kids.
That's right. Natasha, I have to hear what you think about this question. If you have anything else to add on, because I actually have a follow-up to this question that I want to pose to everybody, but I want to give you an opportunity to weigh in. I think you're on mute.
Okay. I would agree with what everyone has said so far, but I think trust is the primary. Building trust is one of the primary ways to be able to, bring parents into the discussion. However, within that trust building, there has to be an acknowledgement of past failures within the system to really support and, create a system that encourages parent participation and also student achievement. I mean, we've seen data be used in a harmful way. We've seen schools be places where our students are prepared for prison instead of prepared for college. So there's already this level of mistrust that's already there. So school systems have to really acknowledge the harms that they've done in the past to create that level of sort of that foundational level of comfort, so the parents could then trust them. I think the other layer is working and being intentional in working with parents to help them understand what the data is and how schools are going to be using them moving forward, and then getting feedback from parents about how they feel about it. I think that's always missing in the discussion, is really getting true, authentic feedback from parents, understanding of what they know, and then how they would like to see data being used.
I love that. Absolutely. Here is the follow-up just really quickly to this same question, because it came up from a few of you. FERPA, the federal law that is supposed to protect student data, has not kept up with all of these apps. And of course, with COVID, lots of school districts had to immediately switch to being fully in person, to getting everything online, right? And I want people to kind of dig in a little bit more when they say FERPA hasn't caught up with, the current way things are done, because I can say for my kids here in suburban Washington, Montgomery County, they're back in person, but they're still using the computers. Right? It's not like back in person. Oh, let's put all the Google Chromebooks back up now. We're back in person. Everything is still sort of continuing the way that it was fully online last year. And Marika, I want to come to you. What are some of the protections that you think is needed in an updated FERPA law if you had it your way?
Why'd you have to start with me? I think this is a perfect one for Paige.
She's coming. I'm going to her too.
Oh, she's coming too. So what I understand is that there's a piecemeal of state and federal laws that are kind of governing this explosion and expansion of the use of data. And so what we know is, first of all, there has been no successful challenge to FERPA. So using that as a way to point to this protects our students is a bit disingenuous. But there are other laws, policies in place that are intended to, but like you said, our technology is emerging and advancing faster than our policies are keeping pace. And I don't want to speak to the specifics of the state level, but when we were navigating in Minnesota, there's very little on the books about it. And it doesn't actually take into consideration that the technology that the state and the districts have aren't keeping pace with the policies either. And so their ability to do both technologies and policies together is challenging.
Oh my goodness, I'm learning like with everybody else with this conversation. I knew I was going to appreciate this. Paige, you're up next.
Sure. I'll just take a stab at this. I'm not all sure who's listening out there, but I'll demystify FERPA a little bit. FERPA is a law from 1974 that Congress passed to clarify a family's rights to their child's data. It's actually not technically a privacy law or a data protection law. It is the Family Educational Rights and Protection Rights and Privacy Act. Even I am struggling, but the F is not for federal, it is family. And if we can think back to the 70s or even the 80s, for those of us pre-technology, you remember those filing cabinets in the principal's office. And the law was designed such that a parent could walk into a principal's office and say, I would like to see my child's file. And what the law says is that the principal has to give it to the parent. That's how it was designed. And the law also said that file in that filing cabinet, the principal can't just hand it to any old person that walks in. They got to call the mom and the dad or the guardian and say, can I share this information? So that's how it was written. And then there were some exceptions to that. So the student's address, you need to share with the transportation company so they can route the buses and pick children up. So it was designed to give a parent a right to their child's information, a right to correct what might be wrong in the record, a right to have some say in who it got shared with, and then the right of the school to say, in order to run my school, I need to get the buses around, so I'm going to share some of this without parental consent. And that was 1974. And so here we are in 2021, and data is collected in so many ways. We have these cell phones. My kids use them in class to do quizzes. Data's collected there. FERPA doesn't govern that data. FERPA is governing grades and course schedules and school discipline data that the school administrators type into a system that's collected from teachers. So in 2021, we have data that's collected electronically from student devices. We have data that is generated simply because students are going to school, courses, grades, attendance, and such. And FERPA is just not where it needs to be to provide the kind of rights and roles and responsibilities around how to manage and govern all of that and protect it at the same time. So as Marika had mentioned, states have stepped in to try to fill some of those gaps. And what we're left with is a patchwork of privacy laws around the country, state by state, as well as the protections that FERPA provides, which is really more of a floor. It's not we talk about HIPAA a lot, particularly lately. HIPAA is a good privacy law in the healthcare sector. It was designed around the privacy, and FERPA was really designed around a parent's right to access their child's data. So we really need to have this comprehensive conversation. And then there's COPPA, which is a whole separate law written in 1998 when policymakers said, wow, we have the internet. We should make sure that kids under 13 can't just do whatever they want. So they wrote COPPA. So we have this patchwork with no real guiding principles around what are a parent's rights, what are the responsibility of the school, who is training everyone that has access to student information, what are they allowed to do, what are they not allowed to do, and the most important thing, going all the way back to what Marika started with, who's enforcing this and what's the penalty?
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot. We have lots of comments, in the chat here. People are really enjoying this conversation. Marika, please.
Can I just want to bring up a point that exists in this data privacy conversation that we don't have a lot of conversation about, and that is data sovereignty for Indigenous peoples.
Yes.
And so in Minnesota, we are having a conversation about that government to government relationship, about how these policies impact the relationship between tribes and schools and Indian education departments and the records that are shared. And so these are things that are still being fleshed out and being resolved, and it's not being talked about as much on a national scale. But this really came to a head in our community when our Native students found out some of their unique data would be used as a indicator in a process about whether they would be involved in the juvenile justice system. And so there's just layers of this conversation that just aren't happening yet. And so I think folks need to think about what are these different groups and relationships that we have with data and our own data sovereignty.
Absolutely. I love that data sovereignty. That's really what it has to be about, right? And this, like, I have so many things that's popping up, and I hear you, Gordon, about the acronyms. I had no idea what COPPA was, so I appreciate Paige being on this panel. It's like, okay, what's that, right? But I get it. Like when she explained that kids under 13 should be protected. Absolutely. I think that I'm struggling with this idea of whether there should be some overarching sort of federal guidance or federal law that catches up with ed tech, but then also if there's particular, I don't know, different issues for different states or whatever, even the District of Columbia, and how they work together. Paige, you mentioned that there have already been some states who've tried to do something around privacy and tech and everything. Do you know off the top of your head if Maryland is one of those states?
Yes, I think Maryland does have a privacy law. If I remember right, there's been hundreds,
Wow.
over 500 bills introduced in the last 6 or 7 years.
I bet.
DQC releases a paper every fall on that legislative session's
nice
legislation, and privacy is a big focus of it.
Right.
And we have over 100 new laws. A lot of them sort of reaffirm FERPA. A lot of them have moved into that online app and digital space. I think it's important to remember.
These are state laws though, right?
They're state, but it's important to remember that the internet doesn't live inside of a state. It crosses state lines. And so if you are a vendor creating an app that you want teachers to use or some sort of online service, you're going to look at, you're not going to create different rules for 50 states because you're never going to make any money. So what you do is you look at the toughest state out there, which is, I think right now, California, and you design your product to pass to meet the bar that California has set. And then, everybody else is covered. So you can go to everybody else and say, it meets California, and then therefore it meets all of yours. But so what we're doing as a nation, when Congress doesn't act, is they're letting the states dictate who gets to be the toughest without having a national conversation. Suddenly we're all following Montana or Rhode Island, which is no way to run national policy.
Right.
And I will say that California looks to the European Union, who this year did a collaborative approach to emerging technologies. The challenge is when Facebook was sitting at the table in front of Congress and having the conversation, we also need to bring our policymakers up to speed at state and federal levels to realistically have any kind of shift.
I wanted to allow Natasha or Kareem to jump in here. Wanted to see if there's anything you guys were itching to add. Feel free to jump in, and then I'll get to the next question.
Natasha, I'll defer to you first. I have something to add, but I'll defer to you first.
Thank you. Unmute. There you go.
Okay. The only thing I was going to add is that, again, I don't think that there's enough regulation in how data is mined or what is specifically taken out and shared. And I think that creating a transparent process will definitely help build that trust. I do like the fact of having the sovereign, an opportunity to seek sovereignty in terms of data, because I know in the Black community, there is this huge mistrust with the system. And we know how in the past and in right now, things have been used against our children's best interest and against us in our best interest. So there should be some policy around this for sure on a federal level.
Sounds like we all need to be getting on the phone with our local congressmen and senators. Come on, Kareem.
Well, let me, because you said a double-edged sword. That's what part of the topic is. So my take is a little different. First, I also work with the NAACP at the state level in California, and we actually in 2020, there's a national resolution around data privacy and making sure that what the youth are protected from we call data exploitation. I think that's the key, data exploitation. Nobody wants their kids' data. 30 years from now, you can't get insurance. You can't get health insurance because you got flagged by some algorithm or some technology and some app or something
That's it.
There's exploitation or we don't want to be driving down the street and get pulled over because you fit the description according to the computer, so that's real. But it's a yes and. It's a yes and. So first of all, the horse is already out the barn.
Ooh,
every time, I turn on my iPhone, I got a COVID. I got a code and also got a thumbprint. I put my thumb on there, boom, thing pop up.
We just down the street. I'm looking up Black Mirror, Kareem.
It's cameras at every intersection when I roll past. I know because they keep giving me tickets. With its biometric data, facial recognition technology, whatever you want to say, man, it's already here. And it's being used in our everyday lives. We just now getting up to speed on it in the education world. But this is our new reality. Okay. So what I want to emphasize is it's important to look at this stuff now and say, how can we limit and reduce or even try to eliminate as much harm to kids as possible? Potential harm and risk. There's risk with everything, but how can we do that? And at the same time, we don't want to cut our nose off to spite our face. In education, you got to have data if you're going to do a good job, an informed job. Everybody talk about scaffolding and tailoring it to the right. How are you going to tailor it to the kid if you don't know what the kid needs? You got to find out some kind of way what the kid needs and where they're at so that you can figure out how best to reach that kid. You can give them a free and appropriate education. And so there's some risk with that. We had 22 states around the country screen for early reading risks or risks of dyslexia, whatever else in K-1-2. Now, these screeners aren't perfect. And I know people who will argue to the teeth, like kicking and screaming that this is a violation of privacy and there's risk to go with that and all that. Yes, and our kids getting locked up in jail because they can't read. And they end up getting a one-way ticket on that school to prison pipeline train. I want my babies to be screened for reading risk. Matter of fact, my daughter, 16-year-old, just found out that she had dyslexia 2 weeks ago. 16 years old. Man, I wish somebody had screened her and found out when she was 7 or 6 and said, hey, your kid is at risk for this. Now, that would have been a risk, but I'd have taken it. So it's a double-edged sword. That's a good title for this topic. We can't be so scared of the data, especially since the horse already out the barn, that we don't do the things our kids need us to do so that we can give them the education that they need and deserve to survive and thrive in this society, in this information age. At the same time, we can't be reckless and we have to be on our P's and Q's about unnecessary risks and how third parties then take that data and have their own agenda. I used to trip out when I was on my computer. I'm like, man, everything that pops up, it sounds good to me. I didn't realize that they were tracking all my usage and what I liked and don't like. And that's why all the ads look good, because it's what I like. They know what I like. So I just don't want us to try to make this. I don't want to do this off our kids' backs. There's some things our kids got to have. And since we're late to the party, since the horse is already out the barn, we shouldn't be chasing it and just saying no data use. Not as fight against everything when our kids are withering on a vine because they're not getting what they need. So it's a double-edged sword. And I think part of it is making sure that schools have the tools that they need, but then also being vigilant and say, now, listen, you got to limit. I don't want this information going to third parties. I don't want this. I don't want that. Staying on top of it as organizations and as individual advocates, just making sure that the kids are as protected as possible and making sure that that's not an excuse for school providers or educational providers not to do the things that they need to do. Because by law, for example, I stick with dyslexia, they have an affirmative responsibility to find and identify those kids. Meaning, it's not like they walk down the street and trip on the kids and say, oh, you got this. No, they got to go find those kids. That's what the law says, that federal law, they got to do that. How are they going to do that unless they screen them and test them and do something or monitor them for risk or whatever the terminology is? But so it's a double-edged sword, and we should go hard to secure protections for our kids. And we need to go hard to make sure our kids get what they need so that they can be protected and thrive in society.
I love that, Kareem, and thank you for that. That's why we called it. It is a double-edged sword. But I want to push you a little bit on one of the ideas that you mentioned. You said a couple of times that the horse is out of the barn or the cart and buggy, it's out, right? Here's the thing. Many things happen in this country all the time without the consent of the masses. And the reason why I say I'm pushing you on this is saying that we can, right? Some people can, or the masses can, and I want to get your thoughts on this. Say, you know what? I think I want you all to pause all of this crap that y'all doing, because I think that we can collect data without facial recognition. Like, we can collect data without like some of these more oppressive tools that we're seeing and biometrics that we're seeing and people not fully understanding. There could be a case where we say, hey, can we just pause on all of this new stuff, because the vast majority of the citizens have no idea, number one, who created it, number two, what are you going to do with it, and what are you doing with it, right? And number three, we've talked about it already. We don't even have laws to catch up with all this stuff. Y'all just pushing it on everybody. You have a response to that?
Absolutely. So I agree with you 100%. You have to, it's not just consent, it has to be informed consent. People have to know what's going on. That's why I mentioned earlier, like, you are part of the role of activists and organizations is to share the risks and help parents understand so they can make informed decisions. That's got to happen. And taking a pause on certain things, perfectly fine. But what's not okay is to say, you know what, we don't have the refined capacity to identify what your kids need in school. So we can't really offer them a free and appropriate education right now. We're going to have to wait on that. Okay, we're going to have to, in a couple of years, we'll get an app that we have vetted and whatever. Listen, okay, fine. We can pause on that. But that doesn't let school systems off the hook for providing our children with a free and appropriate public education. There are others will say, how do you know what's appropriate if you don't screen them and test them or whatever else? Listen, schools have an affirmative responsibility to figure out, meaning it's their job to figure it out. So I agree with you. Informed consent is absolutely important, and sometimes there should be a pause. Maybe we do need to pause on that, but that does not take the schools off the hook from their affirmative responsibility to make sure that our kids are getting what they need and to finding out what those needs are.
Yes, we agree there. We absolutely agree. Cool. So I want to just do housekeeping again. If you're new to this conversation or just joining us, you're like, whoa, what did I walk into? Welcome. Make sure you hit the thumbs up button. Join us. And if you have questions, like we have a very active chat right now. Please put them in the comments. We may bring up your question for one or all of our panelists to engage. So welcome again to this conversation. We're talking about the double-edged sword of data right now. All right, so here's the next question, and I feel like we kind of touched on this a little bit, but maybe if we can, especially with what you just said, Kareem, this next question, it says, how do we build systems that look at leading indicators and early warning signs rather than always playing catch up after lagging indicators show trouble? Maybe we can start with you, Kareem, since you kind of talked about this a little bit in your comments just a few minutes ago.
That man, I don't know who came up with that question, but there it is. So if we can have a wait to fail model, We won't need to test, screen, and do anything. We can just have a wait to fail model, and the kids who, by the time it's clear that they can't read or can't do this or can't do that, then we can give them the help. But if we want to have a prevention model, or if we want to, especially with our students of color and our low-income students, if we want to make sure that we're not waiting until, they 5 feet deep out of a 6-foot grave, if we want to do that, we want to make sure that we have the tools needed that can identify risk factors. And it's not so much that we're like predictive analytics, but to say, listen, if you can't do X, Y, and Z, or if you're missing these skills, or if you're struggling in these areas, we know at kindergarten what kids are likely to struggle to read. We do. And there's a group called Seeds Cares of Learning out here in Oakland, California. This lady was like, look, we know by kindergarten. And so what I would offer is that if you don't want to have a wait to fail model, you have to provide very clear, specific metrics that will track towards success. And that's where parents have to step in. Parents have to say, okay, yeah, I want to make sure my kids read my 3rd grade. So what do they have to know in 2nd grade, 1st grade, kindergarten? What are the specific things about a specific time? And I know kids are different, they evolve, they develop differently. However, how can we monitor progress towards success? Now, and it can't always be some, highfalutin app. I just need y'all to tell me what my kid needs to know and by when. And so that way I can track progress, and that you all can monitor if there's something that's wrong or something that's deficient or lacking. It's flagged before the 5th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade, 11th grade, homeless grade, incarcerated grade, or whatever the grade the society puts on a kid when they can't do what they need to do academically. So I think earlier is better. And we have to make sure schools and school systems have markers and metrics of success so that we can track progress towards those goals.
Thank you. I'm going to bring up Natasha. Same question. What are your thoughts on that? I think you muted yourself, but you were unmuted before.
Okay, here I am.
There we go. Yeah.
I have a lot of thoughts about this. I mean, my first thought is, my concern is that sometimes data could reinforce stereotypes, and that oftentimes that we can see something within data that can then be used against, our kids, our parents, like I said earlier, in our community. And how do we really, when we're talking about creating a system that will have early warning signs, at the end of the day, we're already behind, right? So how do we create a system that's going to first acknowledge that, right? That there's a problem, and it's been a problem. We're sort of playing catch up anyway. And then, just what does that look like? I mean, I really don't know, but I do know that at the end of the day, there needs to be a first acknowledgement that the data can harm us at the same time. It could be a useful tool, depending on who's using the tool, right? I think part of the problem is ensuring that if our community want to use it in a way that's positive, that we have the tools necessary, the training and the understanding, and it has to come from the people who are, authentic and sincere in making sure that it's creating equity, and not really harming people or furthering, stereotypes. And so that's just kind of some of the things that I'm thinking about right now as we talk about this, that at the end of the day, who's creating it? Like who will be creating this system, and what are they going to be using it for? Is one of my concerns.
I love that. That is the question. Marika, I feel like you have a lot to add to that one. Who created it? Who created it, right? Yeah, I love that, Natasha. Marika?
I think it's important that we actually do a level set in this conversation about data, and that data shows up in many different ways. You have data in the classroom that you're looking at to see the progress of your students. You have data around the school, whether it's free and reduced lunch information, whether it's ELL So there's different types of data, and we have to be very clear and specific about the data that we're speaking about. There's data that they collect with apps through Gaggle. So there's different types of data. So when we're saying all data is good or all data is bad, I think it limits the conversation to what we're actually grappling with. So the other piece is, as we're talking about how do we build systems that look at leading indicators and early warning signs, historically, we have grounded that in a deficit-based mindset about how we look at our young people. And so in my experience in St. Paul, when they've talked about early warning systems and such, they have done it in a deficit-based way with information that lacks context, such as suspensions. Like you could say, oh, let's look at all the suspensions that these students have, and that might be a flag for the school to prison pipeline, not knowing that Black students in Minnesota are 8 times more likely to be suspended for subjective reasons out of school. So again, it's the data that we're talking about, the data that we're looking at. And so when I think about systems, it has been the systems that has been making the decisions and driving these decisions in the absence of community, from the origin, from the design. And so with that separation, you are always going to end up perpetuating the system flaws that create the data harms. And so until we really think about what are we expecting for data literacy in our communities to be able to participate in these conversations, I think it's a flawed approach. And that's where I'm landing with the systems question.
Can you lean in just really quickly? Predictive analytics came up, and I was like, oh, we got to talk about that. Can you share, number one, Marika, the definition of predictive analytics and how you have seen it being used in education thus far?
Well, certainly. It is using an algorithm that would use historical information like what has their attendance been? How have they been suspended? Do they receive free and reduced lunch? And they say, if we put all these factors together and we put it into this algorithm, we can actually predict based on this information who is most likely to be involved in whatever they're trying to identify, predicting that this person might be involved with that. So in our experience, we had Ramsey County, the city of St. Paul, and St. Paul Public Schools talking about integrated data sharing across systems, and then using a predictive model between all the information that these systems would feed to determine if students would be more likely to be involved in the juvenile justice system. And again, they had the legal people look at it, they had the research and development and evaluation people look at it, but they missed the big historic context about suspensions in Minnesota. And so it was a completely flawed model. And the other thing about predictive analytics is they're looking at a snapshot at one point in time. So our challenge was, like, if you took a student and used their historical data, well, one of our students said, well, if you looked at my data last year, we were unsheltered. We were highly unhoused. My mom had lost her job. I missed a lot of school. But this year, mom's got a job. We're staying with my auntie. I've been in class. And if you looked at me last year compared to this year, you're not dealing with the same student. And I would be flagged without context.
Oh my God. Oh, this is so, yes. And it leans into what Natasha talked about. It's like, okay, who's creating it? What's the context? And what are you looking for? What are you trying to do here? And I love the fact that there are several of you have brought in historical context. Natasha, I can't say I appreciate you enough for bringing in, especially in Chicago. Did everybody, watch the movie about Fred Hampton? Come on, right? Like who's collecting this data, and the mistrust that certain communities have for the system already. Paige, I want to bring you in. I feel like you've been quiet for a while. I know there's been a lot that has kind of like transpired, but I'm thinking back to the conversation that we had with you when we were talking about all the different acronyms. When you think about what Marika just said about predictive analytics, Has any of that come up in terms of all these hundreds of bills that you've talked about? People have been passing around, privacy, and at your data quality campaign, have you all addressed that at all?
I think legislatively, I haven't seen anyone try to, and certainly nothing that has passed to rule out predictive analytics. I think predictive analytics are like so many other data points. They can do so much good and so much harm. And so I think the mitigation there really is about who is at the table to make the decisions. How transparent are we being about what is it that we're trying to warn about? And Marika has some truly horrific examples in her back pocket that she can pull out anytime, that we've all seen so many headlines. But at the same time, every one of us goes to the doctor. And they do a series of diagnostics with us, and they sit down and they say, okay, I've got your height and your weight. You smoke this much. This is your diet. Based on all of this and everything that we know, you are not likely to see your 60th birthday. So then the question becomes, does the doctor say, I'm done, I'm walking away, you can't be helped? Is there something punitive that then happens? Or does the doctor step in and say, but here's what we know, how to get you onto a healthy trajectory if that's what you want. Let's try an intervention. Let's see you in 6 months and reassess and see where we are. And so those are the kind of conversations we want to have in education, where the evidence, there's evidence, there's research, it's peer reviewed. We're not just making things up and throwing data elements into a big black box and hitting what's the answer, and then we're out there harming children. We're using evidence-based indicators. And one of the best predictive analytics we have out there is the Chicago ninth grade On Track system, which the Chicago Public Schools developed with the Chicago Research Consortia. And they worked to identify with their own students' data over time, what are the factors that help us understand for our kids in our schools what leads to graduation. And every student walks into their high school with an understanding with the parents and student and teachers and principals. Is that student currently on track? And if they are, now the goal is keep them on track. And if they're not on track based on this data, what are we going to do to get them on track? And everybody is at that table. And they've seen tremendous gains in student engagement, in academics, in high school graduation. And the question for me, going back to your question about how do we do this? Well, there's 700 or 800 districts in the state of Illinois. Chicago has the proximity to the researchers, the capacity, the funding, the parent activists. How do you get 799 other districts in the state of Illinois to have what Chicago has? What is the role of the state to make that happen? What is the role of the state to make sure that that kind of indicator then is not used for harm? As we can all, I'm sure all of our brains, we all know, once you hear on track, you wonder, the kids that aren't on track, is there a possibility something good may not happen, right? We all know about what we did with test scores and proficiency. And if you weren't going to be proficient, we know how some educators tended to use that data with students, like, maybe you're not worth my time. We want it to be like our doctors. The rule is first do no harm, treat me and help me move forward through a transparent conversation based in evidence. But let's be clear, as a state, we are, trusting but verifying. We are keeping an eye out. We are training teachers. We are transparent about its use. We will be transparent about misuse. And again, what is the penalty for misuse? How do we hold our educators and our systems responsible for any misuse of this information?
That was good. The one thing that I thought about when you gave that a wonderful explanation, I wasn't aware of the program in Chicago, but when we think about how we're designing systems and thinking about like On Track and things like that, and you may not know like all the particulars of the program, it seems to me we would want to ensure young people are on track before ninth grade, right? And then also, because we've heard Natasha, Marika, and others kind of bring this up, how then are we ensuring that we're doing this with a racial equity lens? Has that been, a part of the conversation. I guess I have to pivot to you, Natasha. Were you aware of that program? Number one, were you at the table, or any parents that you know at the table? And is it done with a racial equity lens?
No. Am I on mute? Because I can't tell if I'm on mute or not.
We can hear you.
Okay, great. No, it's not really. And so the on track, what we know is before our children get to ninth grade, they're not on track. So it actually is an uphill battle once they get to ninth grade to really keep them there. But the issue with that is also that there is a system. However, it's not resources that are put behind that, ensuring that that tool is actually effective and working in schools. So some schools might get it depending on the resources, the staff capability, and the support that they have within the school. But other schools might not have that accessibility to be able to utilize that tool in a way that is meant to be. But at the end of the day, the primary issue is that before students get to ninth grade, we're noticing that they're behind in reading and math and other indicators. So it's difficult for them to move forward to get to high school.
Absolutely. I want to go back to this comment here, and I didn't even see that. I think I was talking literally at the same time that Murray here posted this comment, because usually when I hear about these conversations, especially when it comes to predictive analytics, I have to say, as a mother, and obviously as a Black woman in America, I get concerned. I have a hard time seeing how predictive analytics is going to be good for my kid, especially if we haven't accounted for racial bias and systemic racism in the formula. Marika, I kept seeing your head go up and down. I want to give you an opportunity to maybe respond to that, because I know you are trying to ensure that that's a part of the work that you're doing.
I also saw a comment earlier in the chat where they were talking about, I was giving you the factors for the indicators like suspension, like, well, why didn't they use a predictive indicator of which teachers would be successful with teaching Black children or all children? It's again all about the lens from which we look at a problem. And so what I often say is that we have a lot of commercial solutions looking for a problem. And so again, when you separate communities from the institutions that are trying to drive and make decisions about young people, you're going to have a clash. And so when I think about the pause that we need to take, it really is bringing people up to speed in their data literacy. We still have teachers that are struggling to participate in data conversations at the most rudimentary levels in our school districts. So people are always coming down on like, oh, community doesn't know, but there are so many people in this process that don't know. But with the racial equity, what I saw in our community is that folks are struggling for resources, and that a vendor came along and said, we'll pilot this with you, and you don't have to pay for it to use it. And this is what we've done in other places. And so it's almost like a formula that folks just kind of come and use, and they don't actually put their thinking caps on. Like, how did they miss the fact of like the disparities in suspension? And so there are tools, in Minneapolis Public Schools, they have the equity and inclusion assessment, the EDIA, the equity, diversity, inclusion assessment. So like, it's supposed to assess policies and practices that would facilitate them, but you also have to have people that are going to act on when those things are flagged and seen, and you have to be transparent about them. So the racial bias, there are tools, there are practices, there are people that are doing it well, and there are folks that don't know that they're even not doing it well. They're just
Wow.
trying to grasp at resources and opportunities to support their districts and their students.
I'm going to come back to you for this, but I'm going to want you to unpack a definition for data literacy. I mean, I think people can maybe put it together, but if you in your organization use a specific definition, because I feel like that's one of the tools of how we educate our communities, right? We need an entire glossary around all this new stuff, around everything that's happening. Kareem, I wanted to bring you up in the conversation. Do you have thoughts that you'd like to add here at this moment based on what you've heard thus far?
I think what you just said is key. It's really, it's like we have financial literacy, and we should be teaching financial literacy in schools. That's a whole nother thing. But data literacy with our parents and with our educators is really important, because a lot of times there's data and information collected in schools and nobody knows what to do with it. And what's the point? I mean, for real, tests are given and we're like, okay, so, and then people go on about our day, as opposed to saying, oh, you need to use this test like this and that, and the data, reuse it this. What's the point? So I think data literacy and how to use data, the purpose of what it should be used for, I think that's a growth area just for everyone. And parents absolutely need to be supported with that. And really, districts, if they're going to be using these programs, they should be sharing that information. There's I think, a responsibility that they have to the community they're serving to say, this is what we're doing, this is how we're collecting, this is how we intend to use it, giving them the information that they have, that they need. The other thing, though, is, I was listening to a couple of folks earlier. Paige, what you said is spot on, and I was thinking about that and thinking about what we intend to do versus what we actually do. Our intentions matter. And I'll just say this: we have to be clear about our goals and what we want to do, and that will determine what we need. We need information to really make informed choices, instructional decisions, etc. And at the same time, if we don't need it, if it's not going to further us towards whatever that goal is, then we should be looking carefully. And the last thing, one more last thing, is that our kids are not dollar signs. I know these institutions and companies, I understand business is business. But at the same time, people look at our kids, they see dollar signs walking. It is like, if I could just collect information on this, I can sell this to marketers or whatever. I mean, that's real. That element is out there. And they look at us the same way. We're on our devices and they're collecting information from us all the time. They're selling that to these advertisers to make dollars. And so we got to be careful that our kids just aren't being exploited in the name of whatever the righteous cause is, but that whatever is being collected and used is towards a specific goal, and that people are informed on what those goals are and how we're supposed to be getting there, how the data is going to be used.
So much is coming up in this conversation, and we've kind of covered a lot, but I want to go back to Kareem. I believe it was you that actually brought it up around using data to, for ways in which that we can actually be supporting students and families and the schools themselves and even educators, right? I'm thinking about my school district, right? And like I said, this is suburban DC. So a lot of the parents in this school district work for these agencies who spend a lot of time looking at everybody's data, the NSA, CIA. And I remember, and Marika, you actually brought it to my attention. This was back in 2019, because you've been doing this work for a while. She's like, hey, check out what's going on in your backyard. And it was a group of parents who actually work for these federal agencies like, oh, wait, my kids don't have protections. They're using Google Classroom. And I want to make sure that the school district literally erases this every year. So MCPS, thank you. MCPS, the school board acted here locally to to ensure that their contract with Google included a provision that says that Google will not save the data where, because basically what these parents were concerned about when they got ready to apply for college and they, I don't know, looked up something about the Ku Klux Klan, that it wouldn't come back and bite them. So I think that all parents, not just parents who have, the information because like they work for these agencies, all parents should be able to have access to that type of information and to know like what can be used against their children in the future. I guess I wanted to ask Paige really quickly, because I know you're here in the DC area. Were you aware that that happened in MCPS?
I might have been at the time, but at this point, I don't remember.
There's so much happening. It's so, well, I mean, because I think at the time it was unique. A lot of school districts hadn't done that before, at least acted locally instead of like at the state or the federal level. Because again, like everything that we're talking about, a lot of this stuff is so new, and a lot of parents, like I'm in the district and I had no idea. And I'm a parent activist, right? But I had no idea that this was even a thing. Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a best practice. I mean, districts are the business office of schools, right? And they're the ones that have agreements, paid and unpaid, with apps and technology, but also non-tech, right? Your bus companies and your food services, but then Google. And so they're the ones, it's kind of on our school districts to be on top of what are their rights in terms of negotiating a contract. And I think it was Kareem maybe that mentioned earlier that they come in and they offer things for free, and it kind of gets you in early on, and you have less negotiating power. We all love free things, but you have no negotiating power when somebody's offering you for something for free. And so what some of the state laws that we talked about earlier, what some of them have done, have provided rules around how districts need to negotiate with vendors, the kinds of things that need to be in contracts and the processes that need to be in place to ensure that those conversations are a part of the negotiation around how will we protect the data, what are the, I'm blanking on the term, the retention and destruction of data that you collect, which is what they negotiated, right?
That's exactly what they negotiated.
You have to get rid of it. Those are all negotiable. But again, we're asking our districts, and some of them are super savvy about it. Montgomery County, Houston, New York, LA, Chicago are big ones. But of our 13,000 school districts, we might be talking about 150 that can really do that. Read the legalese, dive in, know even where to go for best practice. Who do you even call for this? Dig into your state website, see if there's any guidance. But as we all know, those district folks are now driving buses and serving food and taking kids' temperatures at the door. And so who's actually reading the contract for services, if there even is a contract?
Yeah, that's the work. Marika, I don't know. Yeah, I wanted to bring you in. I saw you nodding. I wanted to give you an opportunity to respond.
Yes, I think it just it reiterates how much work there, or how much of a lift there is. But Paige actually shared, I don't think you can see it behind the scenes, their definition of data literacy, and I wanted to add mine.
Let's put that in the comments. Yeah.
And so Paige at the Data Quality Campaign defines data literacy as data literate educators continuously, effectively, and ethically access, interpret, act on, and communicate multiple types of data from state, local, classroom, and other sources to improve outcomes for students in a manner appropriate to educators' professional roles and responsibilities. I like that. And the Twin Cities Innovation Alliance works with communities and parents to lift their data literacy. And so in a nutshell, what we say is that back to school backpack of all those forms you have to sign off on, whether it's consent on your pictures or the data that's going to be collected, the fact that you're going to use a device, all of those forms that are saying and sharing with you that they're using, collecting, or doing data, we want you to be able to read them. And unlike on our phones, when there's an app that we really want, a game that we really want, we're willing to scroll through the agreements and just click go. Data literacy will, in your mind, make you pause and think about and read those areas of consent, and be able to talk to others. So one of the things that we've done at Twin Cities Innovation Alliance is we actually piloted the No Data About Us Without Us Fellowship this past spring from January to June, where we worked with 25 parents in 5 communities across the country. I'm sorry, across the state of Minnesota. We did it in English, Somali, and Spanish. And so they met twice a month to learn about their school district, the use of their data, and then how to partner with them. And they all came up with data projects so that they could learn how to engage with their own districts. And so I wouldn't say like they're teaching data now, but going through this experiential learning process, from that, many of them formed data advisories for their school districts so that they could be in conversation with their district about what has been, what is, and what is possible. Because we also know that like some funding mandates that you collect data. And so it's not always that you can involve the community in saying from the beginning, this is what we want to do, but that they are at the table at all the decision points along the way when data is being used in big ways. The other investment is that they walked away saying they're tired of people telling them this is too complicated to understand, and that we're no dummies. And so the ability to go and talk to their staff at the school, to ask questions, so much so that they are now considering themselves data ambassadors in their districts and talking with other parents about that back to school toolkit, or I'm sorry, back to school paperwork that you have to fill out digitally now. And so once they see, the parents that we've been working, once they see the information, they can see their self-agency. And I'll just give you one example of how it's made a difference. And so we had a group from St. Cloud that was looking at the data, and it was predominantly ELL parents, English language learner parents. And they're like, there is this point in this form that we fill in kindergarten where it asks if English is the first language that is spoken at home. And if we check that English is the first language spoken at home, our child will be in EL language courses and separated from the classroom. And yet our child actually speaks English fluently. The question that they're asking does not have enough context for you to make a decision about our placement. And so they had a conversation with the school district about that, because they went in and looked at different data points that the district was collecting and making
the assumptions they made.
Yes. And so they were able to shift it, but you have to have the participation of parents, and they have to have that intimidation interrupted because people keep saying, this is too hard for you.
Oh my God, that's amazing. And I have to tell you, as you were talking, I didn't want to interrupt you, but since you've educated me on that little form, because I don't know if you remember, you came here a couple of years ago during the Week of Action and had a conversation with parents here in the MCPS school district about this. You was like, oh yeah, you signed it. And I was like, I did? I don't sign those papers anymore because of you, Marika. I don't know. I'm like, they haven't called me. Now if they're watching, they're going to call me, right? But I haven't signed those papers. Ever since then, I'm like, I get it. The very first week of school, both of my kids bring them home, and I don't sign them anymore. Now, who knows what they're still doing, because there's, MCPS is the largest school district in Maryland. So they have literally hundreds of thousands of other students that they're looking after. But I love the fact that you have created this fellowship that brings in the actual consumers of education, the actual stakeholders, the parents. And I'm sure you're developing a program for students as well. And yeah, I know you, Marika. It's happening. And I appreciate hearing that story about the parents in St. Cloud, because it goes to show you that if you actually involve parents, literally like as an equitable stakeholder in the conversations and not in a patronizing manner, like unfortunately a lot of school districts do, you can see that they will see things that may be blind spots for other people, like that school district who made assumptions based on somebody checking a box. I wanted to bring in Natasha, based on sort of what you heard, you know, from Marika, and just what we've been talking about, you know, all of this, you know, stuff around data and how, you know, bringing in parents is really crucial in that. I wanted to give you an opportunity to offer thoughts based on what you just heard from Marika. You can unmute. I'm sorry, you can't see that.
Yeah. No, I appreciate what she said. I think that's so important. You know, I'm a parent advocate. I think parents should always be at the table. I mean, in Chicago, we do have the Student Online Protection, Personal Protection Act. And, you know, even though we have this act and we have this information that's on, you know, Chicago Public Schools website for parents to access, you know, it's still difficult to find, right? So it's not very accessible, so to speak. But I do think there should be an intentional, you know, training and just opportunities for parents to really be at the table to be able to, number one, understand and learn where this information is. And I don't really think our school district did a great job at making it known about this act, or even, you know, pulling parents in. I know that there were groups that were on the ground working to push CPS to create some form of protection. But at the same time, there's always that gap between once this system is in place, now how is it going to be implemented, and how is it going to funnel down to the people who directly need to understand it is there. And so I think that putting that intentional investment in that area, providing training, is so important for our community, for sure.
Absolutely. Let me go to another question. Oh, I'm sorry. Was somebody trying to get in? Okay, I thought I heard somebody trying to get in. Here's another question I wanted to ask, pose to the panelists. And you know, people have touched on this on and off, but I want us to try to give a focused answer if we can. What are the most important measures of student success, and how do we get everybody looking at them together from a data perspective? Kareem, I think I'm going to come back to you for that one first.
Most important measures of student success. Well, safety, reading, and foundations of math are critical for everything else. Safety first. I mean, there's wellness data around, you know, how a child is experiencing school. Do they feel threatened? And not just by a kid, but by the institution itself and the things and the curriculum and whatever else. Do they feel safe in school? You know, it matters. Parents want to know, when I send my child to school, are they going to come back in one piece? And so you got to figure out how to make sure you are surveying or talking to kids, and knowing whether or not that's taking place, that they're safe in school. The second thing, teach them to read. Now, there are no universal indicators of kindergarten readiness. So when we talk about teaching kids to read, we're talking about 5 to 7 pillars of foundational reading skills, and in identifying their progress towards mastery of those skills. And then for math, you're talking about, the dropout class is algebra. It has a name. Algebra is one of the biggest reasons why kids drop out. They can't read. They haven't been reading from day one. But algebra, you hear kids say all the time, man, I used to be able to do math. I used to love math. Now I don't know what this is. So, and they don't do algebra very well because they have pre-algebra skills. They don't have pre-algebra because they don't know fractions and decimals and percentages, and they can't do that because they don't know the times table. So you walk that thing back, and some of the core elements of, and then you can go back to addition for that. But we ought to be able to monitor and support kids to mastery. I know there's a lot of different ways about how to, teach multiplication facts and all type of stuff. I'm just saying, we got to know at the end of the day that they have that mastered, hopefully with understanding about what they're doing. Just like they need foundational reading skills mastered, so that they can then read to learn as opposed to learning to read. And then we got to make sure they're safe. We got to make sure that when they come to school, they not feel threatened by the NSO, a school security officer, or
right,
or a peer, or a teacher or an administrator or community, whatever, or the pit bull running loose on campus. We got to make sure our kids feel safe when we drop them off, and then when they come back, they're in one piece. So those are the things that I would key on.
I appreciate that. Marika, same question.
I like to focus on like the 8 basic youth needs, because I believe that we had a really good compliment about how to support them academically. So I'll just add on that a measure of success for young people is seen in their relationships with others, adults and peers. Do they have 5 significant adults in their life in a school building, folks that they trust? I would also say that they have a sense of belonging in their school learning community with staff and others, and the belief in the capacity to learn. Their belief in the capacity to learn and others' belief in the capacity to learn, I think, are critical factors that help us get to the literacy. It's not an either or, it's a both and.
I love that. Others have thoughts to add on this really quickly. Paige, want to give you opportunity as well?
Yeah, I would just say that, every indicator has a trade-off. And when we say, what are our best measures of student success, I would want to know first, who are we trying to give the indicator to, and what do we want them to do with it? And so as a parent, there are things I'm looking for about my child. And then as a parent, there are things I'm looking at about the school and the community. And we try to do these one-size-fits-all measures. So one reading test, a state assessment, we use it for so many different things. And while it's important for me to know if my child is proficient, I need my child to be able to read at grade level. I also need to know, is the school growing kids? So overall, a student growth measure in terms of reading is going to help us understand where are educators moving children forward. Even if they haven't gotten to the bar yet, they're moving them forward well and quickly. And so we need each child to be able to read. So if you're not proficient, that is definitely a problem for a family and an individual child. They're going to have to get there. But you want your child, their best bet to get there is to go to a school where they have high growth. So I think it's looking at what is it that who needs that indicator of success, and what is it that we want them to do with it? Because too often we are a one size fits all, and really no one ends up served very well that way.
Amen. Amen to that. Natasha, I want to give you an opportunity as well. You can come off mute now. Yes, yeah. No, we're still not able to hear you. I don't know if our producer can bring you off.
Okay, there we go.
There you go. Okay.
The main one for me is proficiency, is whether or not the school is creating a proficient student in reading and math. I think that's very key. I definitely think that safety, creating a safe environment, is so important, and ensuring that students are felt protected and engaged and respected in the building. I think that also sets the foundation for learning. And then really, how do they engage parents and the community around the school to ensure that the student is getting that full support, not just in the building, but understanding what the outside of the building looks like for the students, and ensuring that they're connecting that as well. But number one for me is proficiency.
I appreciate that. Thank you all for answering that. I want to tee up this Bethesda Beat article and kind of get you each and every one of your thoughts on this. The same group of parents here in Montgomery County, this group of savvy parents who all work at the NSA and the CIA and all those different agencies here. They're pushing now. So the article that we brought up earlier was from 2019. This is actually from this summer. Parents in this county have filed a complaint actually with the U.S. Department of Education, and around the things that we were actually talking about at the very top of the hour when we first started this conversation was like, number one, FERPA isn't even a privacy law, and then all of the stuff that we're talking about has not kept up with all of this technology. So, these savvy parents here in Montgomery County, Maryland, are pushing for greater protections that actually don't exist, and they want it to come from the federal government. I would love to know, as we wrap up our discussion today, what kind of things from your perspective, right, do you think should be included for federal student privacy protections? And I will start with you, Marika. Oh, you have a lot to add to this. Don't even trip.
I have a lot to add. I just don't want to just have a bleh. I think I don't think we can create a policy or a practice right now that encompasses everything, and that as we're drafting this policy, it has to think about how can it expand as this continues to emerge.
Right.
One of the things that I don't think we're talking enough as we're going into the future is how to actually address the harms. And California has actually tackled that, as has the European Union. So in federal policy, when there is this misuse that occurs or engineered consent that leads to misuse, I think we need to have folded into those federal laws, beyond regulation, what is the accountability of those systems to the individual or those communities? And based on that, I've been looking into what do community benefit agreements actually look like between communities and systems? I know they're not legally binding, and that's why I'm still looking into them. But how do you lay out the expectations, the transparency, and the accountability in the advance? So as you're going through this process, communities and systems have a way to tackle this. And there's a bit of leverage given to both groups as they're trying to navigate that. So I'd like us to explore, what does that partnership have to look like in order for systems to be responsible and accountable to communities?
Amen. Paige.
My goodness, so many things. I'll try to focus in on a few things. My brain went where Marika's did, of just like, there's so much. A couple of things. There is no federal requirement in the land that people who have access to identifiable information be trained. There's no requirement that they be trained. That's a problem. That's a big problem in my eyes. We have so many safeguards around permission slips for field trips. I spent all morning, and my kid went on a field trip today, and they were calling me, and we didn't get it in, and I had to email the teacher. So much training, the training to get, Kareem, I'm from the West Coast, all the training to get out of the building on the earthquake days.
Right.
But we don't train teacher every single day. There are small and big privacy violations of our students. Every single day we betray confidentiality. Confidentiality is not covered by FERPA, but most of the complaints that go in are around a confidentiality being broken. So we have to get training in there for the people who are closest to our students, their teachers, their principals, community folks, to really understand what all of this is and why it matters. The other thing I would say is that because the technology has changed so much, and we talked about how our policies haven't evolved, it's not clear that our agency bureaucracy, for lack of a better term, is actually equipped to deal with any of this. And I'll give you a small example. I mentioned COPPA earlier, which governs online activity, children's online privacy and protection. It is not governed by the U.S. Department of Education because it actually seeks to regulate the vendor itself and not the school or the district. So it would regulate Google or those kind of companies. However, it cannot regulate, the FCC cannot regulate nonprofits. So if you are a nonprofit organization with an app, there's no one out there to regulate you. if you
That's nuts.
if you are a private school, which I know you got in Bethesda,
Yes.
if you're a private school and you're collecting student data, FERPA doesn't cover that child. So
Right.
we have kids out there all across America engaging with schools, engaging with apps, and there is no entity that can regulate them. The US Department of Education cannot touch private schools. The FCC cannot touch nonprofits. It's in how they're designed and built. So we have all these holes. And again, HIPAA doesn't care if you're at a county hospital or at Sibley Hospital over
That's
in
right.
Northwest DC. It doesn't
Right.
care what kind of hospital you're in. It protects you as an individual, whereas our federal laws around student privacy aren't about the individual and the rights you have. It's about
Right.
what are we going to tell schools to do, or what are we going to tell this company to do? It isn't actually about the individual. So that's why I say it's not a privacy law. It's a regulatory framework
Right.
around what must these companies do. You probably tried to sign up your kid for an email account when they were 12 one day, and it said, "What's your birthday?" And you were honest, and it said you couldn't do it. And then kids figure out how to just lie to the system and say, "I'm over 13." That's COPPA.
Yep.
And then over there on FERPA, it's 18. And so we've just got this crazy patchwork that was just never designed for what we're living in today.
That's so good. I'm glad that you're bringing out those holes. Again, I'm moderating this discussion, and I think I've learned just as much as anybody listening in the audience. I really appreciate each and every one of you. Kareem, what would you like to see, right, in a federal Student Privacy Protection Act that the parents here in my community are pushing for?
Well, I won't add too much to what's already been said, other than it was mentioned earlier about the old file cabinet in the principal's office. I remember those file cabinets. I was a principal.
Me too.
And what struck me though was that most parents didn't even know I had a file on their kid. And as a teacher, we collected CUME folders every year. At the end of the year, the teachers would fill in, this kid can do this well, can't do that well, struggle with all that. And it goes into a metal box, and we pass it from teacher to teacher every year, and all your records go into everything. And most parents didn't even know that stuff existed. So I think one of the biggest things at the federal level is that institutions, whatever records are kept, whatever it is, whatever the system, whatever they're collecting, whatever, that parents not just should have access to it, but there should be designated periods that are staffed accordingly to promote and provide access. In other words, this is Records Day. Come down to central office, everybody. You can get it anytime, but on this day we're staffed up. All you got to do is come in, fill this out, and So I want to see an affirmative move towards privacy. I want to make sure that people are getting access to whatever has been collected. Not just what are you going to do with it, but do parents have access, and are school systems required to share and provide the information to parents? Or are they only on the hook to sit back and wait for you to come? Is this an affirmative requirement or not? And I would like to see something on the statute to be an affirmative requirement. Just like if a kid has a special need, look, you can't tell me you're giving that child a free and appropriate public education unless you go figure out what's going on with them.
Right.
It's an affirmative responsibility. You have to go share the information. And so I would like to see the same thing around data, meaning it should be an affirmative responsibility of schools and districts or systems, whatever, to ensure that parents are given the information. Maybe you mail it to them. However it is, here's a link, encrypted or encoded or whatever it is you got on registration day. Here, something to whereas they not just have access to, but are provided.
That's right.
That's what I would like to see. Other than that, the things that have been said already are on point.
I love
and I would concur with them as well.
Absolutely. Natasha. Unmute. It's okay.
I mean, everyone has said it all, honestly.
Yeah.
You took what I was going to say. So I do think there should be a piece for the parents to be able to have that access. And if anything, like maybe it should be a mandate that schools train parents around
There
data.
you go.
I know that they do that for like Title I funding. There's a
That's
mandate
right.
that they have to learn the laws around that.
Yes.
So it could be a mandate as well.
I love that. This has been such a fruitful conversation. I have thoroughly enjoyed moderating this conversation and engaging with each and every one of you and your expertise and knowledge on this issue. The only final thing that I think that I would add to this is that, number one, I'm probably going to be reaching out to these parents since I live here. And number two, one of the things that I'm thinking so that we don't continue to have this blind spot when we're creating policy and law and practice is that I think that in the United States, especially when it comes to education, there has to be a historical analysis done before any law is passed. And I also think that there has to be a racial equity lens. And I am probably sure that, maybe that is not currently being talked about in this federal push, but that's something that I think that we should insist on being added, because every single time we don't, we end up years later looking back and there's all these collateral consequences. It never fails. It happens all the time. So with that, I want to say thank you again to each and every one of you. We appreciate you spending your time with us today. To our audience, thank you. You guys were so active in the conversation. Again, we're having these Seeking Common Ground conversations every Wednesday at noon in the month of October. And we want you to join us next week at noon, same place, same time. Thank you to our panelists, and thank you all for listening. Take care, everybody. Goodbye.